Welcome to the 264th consecutive meeting of the Lexington Veterans Association. I'm Linda Dixon. So happy to welcome all of you. We have another wonderful crowd and another excellent program for you. We have just a few announcements and a couple of items of business before we get to our program. But first, would we all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, and this afternoon it will be led by Bob Pride.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Bob. I'd like to introduce some special guests. We have 4 young men in the front row. Why don't you stand, gentlemen? These gentlemen are students at the International School of Boston. They are Matteo and Theophile, Arnaud, and Paul. And they have already spent some time interviewing Ed Loturco and our speaker, Ron Sterring, because they're working on a school project interviewing as many Vietnam veterans as they can find and just chatting with them informally to learn about your experiences. So if we have any Vietnam veterans in the room who, after the program, could just spare 5 or 10 minutes to sit down, chat with our guests, they would be very, very grateful. So welcome, and thank you for being with us. Now, on a sad note, we lost one of our members last month, and I would just like to say a few words in his memory. William Bill Hooper, World War II veteran, resident of Lexington, died on January 15 at the age of 94. So let me just tell you a little bit about Bill's military record. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy in December of 1942. He was assigned to the USS Pipefish, which was a submarine, SS-388 out of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Pipefish was launched in October 1943, commissioned in January 1944. From May 1944 until August of 1945, Pipefish made 6 war patrols in the Pacific Theater. The longest one was 70 days. During those patrols, the Pipefish cleared numerous enemy mines, made several daring rescue missions, and took a lot of enemy hits in the process. The Pipefish received 4 battle stars for her World War II service. Bill received numerous individual medals. He was discharged March 1, 1946 as an electrician's mate, first class. So may we just all have a moment of silence to remember a true hero from World War II. Thank you. Well, thanks again to Starbucks in Lexington Center, our partner for supplying the delicious coffee. Thank you to everyone who brought the wonderful banquet of baked goods. We'll all put on an extra pound, I'm sure, after today. And thank you for your donations of cash to help our operating expenses. We certainly appreciate it. Thank you to all who attended the Martin Luther King Day exercise and/or who contributed goods or cash to the Veteran Project to support the veterans at Bedford Green. It was a fabulous success. In fact, Sophia Ho, you're here. Where are you, Sophia? Why don't you just quickly tell us how much was contributed?
First of all, I'd like to thank everybody who participated in this event. We were very happy to tell you that we had a donation box. We collect $450 in checks and 2 gift cards, and a table full of the gifts. We estimated it's about $450 to $500. So after Martin Luther King Day, that was Monday, I drove my husband's truck to the VA hospital and delivered the whole thing to them. They are very, very happy, and they're very, very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. George Burnell also has a brief announcement. He was a customer and a consumer of some services over at the VA hospital, and he's so happy and satisfied with them, he wants to make sure everybody knows about them. Right?
I found out mostly by accident, which is why I'd like to pass this on to you. But the VA hospital in Bedford has a wellness program. It's an outpatient program. Any veteran's entitled to use it. A great gymnasium with all kinds of athletic equipment and a pool. I'm taking aquatics exercise up there. They have summer and winter programs with bicycling with 3-wheeled bicycles and kayaks with outriggers and people to help you, and there's just all kinds of stuff going on. And I don't know why anybody's keeping it a secret. So the sheet is over there on the table. If you want to take a look at it, if you want to talk about it, see me after the program.
Thank you. Gresh.
George, any veteran can go, or just if you have a disability?
I think it's any of them.
All you need to do is see your primary care doctor. If he issues you a pass, you're set and ready to go.
So you have to be
And
in the VA system?
You have to be in the VA system, and your primary has to give you a pass. It's what they call a gym and pool pass. All I did was said I wanted to go, and I got one. You know, there was no buts and ifs about it. The facility is designed to help handicap. It's to help, basic work for veterans that are injured or handicapped, whatever. But the program, the facilities are not used very much for that purpose, and the rest of the facility is available. So the pool is available for us from 11 to 35 days, 6 days a week, for example. And then they use it for the other programs the rest of the time.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Coming events, please remember to check your calendar and mark it for Friday evening, March 9. This is the Cronin Lecture at the Historical Society at the Depot, co-sponsored by the Lexington Historical Society and the Lexington Veterans. And the program is Women of the Greatest Generation in Their Own Words, and it will be stories of women who lived through World War II. So we will be emailing you about it, sending you several reminders, and we hope to see you there.
Is there a cost?
No, it's free. It is free. And there's food. That's always attractive. Very quickly, next month's program, while I have a captive audience, 4 weeks from today, Monday, March 12th, we will be talking about how the military services train future leaders. They don't train them the same way they did 30 or 40 years ago. We will have someone from ROTC who says they don't run them through the woods and do squad tactics anymore. Of course, if you're on a ship, that doesn't apply. Because nobody knows where the next war is going to be fought or how it's going to be fought. So the way they train leaders now is to teach them to think and to solve problems. So it's a whole new way of training, and it's totally exciting. And the leadership of our military forces is in very good hands. So I hope that you will come and learn about that next month. All right, does anybody have any other announcement of interest they would like everyone to know about? If not, let us get on to business. It will be my pleasure to introduce our speaker. So, we never know what decision will determine our career path. For Ron Sterring, when he was drafted in 1969 and he joined the Air Force, his career path was decided when he answered yes to the question, would you be interested in learning a new language? He spent the next 7 years on active duty as a linguist, learning not one, but 2 languages, North Vietnamese and Russian. Now, learning the North Vietnamese language is a totally different experience from learning, say, French or Spanish. And I believe Ron is going to give us all a little hands-on training as a taste of the total immersion training that he went through to become proficient in North Vietnamese. He used his language skills as a voice intercept operator aboard recon aircraft flying 18-hour shifts over Vietnam. If an Allied plane was in danger, his team issued a warning. After 3 years, Ron re-enlisted, learned Russian, and worked as an intelligence analyst at Fort Meade, Maryland. A graduate of the University of Maryland, Ron spent 20 years in the field of computer programming and systems analysis before co-founding SCI Group, a software and service company. He served in the reserves until 1991, retiring at the rank of captain. So, let's learn a little bit about the North Vietnamese language, among other things. Please welcome Ron Sterring.
Can everybody hear me? Oh, yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. What I want to do is give you an outline of what we're going to talk about today. So this is going to be 2 things. One, about learning a language. Very different than a lot of people can imagine. Secondly, is after I learned the language, what did I do? And what I did as a North Vietnamese linguist is entirely different than what I did as a Russian linguist. After we go through that, I will tell you some stories that I think that I feel comfortable telling you. There are some stories that I will not. And primarily, it's because of security clearances, to be honest with you. And then lastly, I'll be open to any questions. But I want to go through a couple of things real quick. One is, one of the reasons I joined the Air Force is when I got my draft notice, I went into the Navy recruiter first. I was going to go into electronics. And went into the Navy, talked to them, and then they asked what was going on in my personal life. And at that point, I was engaged to be married. They said, forget it. You're going to be on 4 years on a ship. You won't be on land anywhere. said thank you, walked out, walked next door to the Air Force. Again, same thing, no issues there with getting married or anything else. So it turned out to be the right decision. My wife and I are going to be celebrating our 49th anniversary this year. But the other side of it was, as Linda said, I went in for electronics. Sometime during basic training, I took this little aptitude test. And at one point, I had a question that was about 1/8 of an inch square block. If you're interested in learning a foreign language, check this. I did. Next thing I knew, I was going to become a North Vietnamese linguist. So, let's talk about languages. These are the 3 foreign languages that I have learned in my lifetime. Not all of them were in the military. They are Hebrew, Russian, and Vietnamese. So I'd like, by a show of hands, which language do you think is the hardest to learn?
Russian.
So, Hebrew, everybody raise your hands. Okay? Russian, everybody raise your hands. Vietnamese, people raise your hands. Okay. Now, the answer is more people got it right. And since I saw what it was, I can tell you that. So let's talk about learning languages. First language I learned was Hebrew. I learned Hebrew not in the military. I learned it when I started learning it when I was 6 or 7 years old because I was going to be bar mitzvahed at age 13. And I learned language in the traditional aspect of it. You went to school, you learned the alphabet. Then you started putting together little words. Then you started learning sentences and how to read. But I never learned Hebrew to speak it. I never learned it from a conversational perspective. But a few interesting things about the language. First of all, you read from right to left, not left to right. Secondly, you don't see any vowels. The early Hebrew language, Aramaic, if you look at the original Bible that you can see, is written without vowels. Hebrew nowadays does carry vowels, but they're underneath the letters where they belong. But the strange thing about Hebrew is while I learned it that way and got through my bar mitzvah fine, it is probably the language I'm most familiar with now. It's the one I use the most. I learned it from a religious perspective. So I go to temple periodically. I read prayers, especially on the high holidays. And also been exposed to it because one of my daughter-in-laws is Israeli. And when the children were born, they were raised in a home that spoke both English and Hebrew. So there I started picking up some of the Hebrew. So I'm exposed to Hebrew annually. Next language I learned was Russian. Now, Russian I went through 2 different times. I learned Russian first in high school. I had a Latin teacher who was Russian-born, and he somehow convinced the high school in Hollywood, Florida, to let him teach a Russian course. And he got okayed. So again, I learned the language the traditional way. So one of the cute stories that we have is when he decided for us to learn Russian, he was going to give everybody a Russian name. So we came into class the second day, and one of the young ladies sat at her desk and looked at the sign and said, "What is Bipa?" Well, Bipa that you see here is the Russian word for Vera, a girl's name. So from that point on, for the rest of high school, she was known as Beepa. The CCCR, we've all seen growing up. We're used to seeing USSR, CCCP. We're used to seeing USSR for the Soviet Union. Well, CCCP, or stands for Soyuz Sovietsky Socialistisky Republics, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So that's the difference in the two. Russian, beside the Cyrillic alphabet, which you saw on the first page, has some consonants that are English-looking but not English-sounding. So you have the Russian B, which is an English V. Have the Russian H, an English N. The R, the P is an R, C is an S. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot character. And there's a mystery that just came out in a movie again with Johnny Depp, Murder on the Orient Express. And in the scene of the crime, they find a handkerchief with the letter H on it. So the police and the detectives spend all their time looking at the women whose last names began with H to see what interaction they had with the person and could they be the one who killed them. Of course, as the story goes on, you find out all the things they missed. And what they missed is one of the other women on the chain was a Russian countess named Natalia. So the letter H on the handkerchief was the Russian letter N for her name, Natalia. It was her handkerchief. So the other thing about Russian is don't use it that much. Not real reason to. But a few years ago, my wife and I went to St. Petersburg, Russia. First time I was able to get there in a good many years. And what I found is being immersed in the language, things started coming back to me. You could start reading signs. You could start remembering what words were. Some things just automatically popped in my mind that I didn't even think about. And it popped in my mind in Russian, not English. So I know deep down inside that if I was immersed in it, I could learn it again real easily. And I'll say this from the front. Vietnamese is probably the same way. This is the Vietnamese language. This is the first language I learned in the military. It was going to school. You start speaking the language from the day you start school. So, first thing I learned in Vietnamese was Chào ông, ông có mạnh khỏe không? Hello, how are you? Diverged a little bit. In Russian, first things I learned was Здравствуйте, как вы поживаете? Hello, how are you? Dialogues from the beginning. And if you really stop and think about it, that's really the way we learn English. We started learning English not when we went to school, but when we were growing up in the crib. People would come over and say hello, and they want you to go hi. That's how you learn the language, as you were immersed in it. So for 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, for a 9-month period, we were immersed in the language. After the first week, we could not speak English in class at all. Every night we had a dialogue. But Vietnamese was the hardest language to learn. And the reason, multiple reasons. First of all, You need to eliminate English inflections. Vietnamese is a tonal language. So you can have a word that, quote, looks the same, has a different tone mark, means something entirely different. And many times during our dialogue presentations the following morning, our teacher would sometimes start laughing or look very embarrassed. And when we go to her after the class and ask her what, she says, well, the way they said that, you really don't want to know, or was really inappropriate. Second is, contextually, the same word can mean a different thing. And again, I'll go into this a little bit more. But there are no pronouns in Vietnamese. Thirdly, positionally. Depending upon where the word is in the sentence, changes the meaning of the sentence. If you remember, when I started, I said the first thing I learned was Chao Ong. Ong ko mein kwek hong. Hong at the end signifies it's a question. That's not the meaning of the word, but hong there at the end signifies it's a question. And finally, while the language written the same, both North and South have different pronunciations for some of the consonants and different ways of saying some of the vowels. So let's go through each one of them. So this is the Vietnamese word ba. So ba, said very flat, is the number 3. Ba, with the downward tone, is word of respect to a woman, means grandmother. Ba is the word for residue. Ba, upward tone, means embrace. Ba, guttural, you swallow it. If it's used as an adverb, it means any. If it's used as a verb, it means strengthen. Very much contextual in how you understand the language. And the final tone mark, ba, means bait. Another example of that. If you sort of remember when I was showing the alphabet, some of the vowels had some marks on them. There were 3 A's and a couple of O's. That's an indication of whether you're saying a long O or a short O. O. Or oo. So hong is a short O with a downward tone. Means bent. Hong, that's what at the end of a sentence means it's a question. It means not, no, for nothing. It's also the number 0. Hong, hollow. Hong written with a capital K is the word for Confucius. Okay, as I was researching, doing this presentation, it came to me all of the little nuances and idiosyncrasies and what I really went through learning North Vietnamese. And by the way, when I learned North Vietnamese, I could not understand South Vietnamese. And I'll show you why in a little bit. As I said, there are no pronouns in the language. So you take the word ein. And if I say, for example, ein ko mein kwek hong, how are you? If I'm saying it to you, and this is for male, ko is what I would use for female of a peer nature. Talking to you, I'm asking, how are you? If we're talking about somebody else, it's how is he? Ong, same word. It's you, he, whatever, but it's reverence to an adult, an elder. It's the word for grandfather. Again, context depends who you're talking to. Positional. This has always been the fun part. Because in English, we like to play around with where words are in a sentence to emphasize them differently. So if I say, the man walks slowly, the man slowly walks, or slowly walks the man, you all can envision an individual walking slowly. But based on how I say it, the context of how he's walking gives you a different image. However, if I say, "Ein die Hong," I'm saying, again, are you going, is he going? But if I say, "Ein Hong die," it says he didn't go. Same words, different order, entirely different meaning. Consonants. Consonants are what looks like an English D is a Z in the north and a Y in the south. The D with the bar through it, that's the letter D. The R in the north is also a Z, and in the south is an R. So for example, while I was in country, I was stationed at Cam Ranh Bay in South Vietnam. If I was from the north, I would say that as Cam Ranh Bay. So when you're listening to the language spoken, it's very difficult to understand the south dialect if you've learned the north. Because when people speak it, it's much quicker than you're used to, and you're trying to grab context. Also, Vietnamese has these consonant combos. Now, Russian and Hebrew each have letters that have these combination of consonants. But in Vietnamese, you have the KH, which is a sound. You have the NG, which is a ng. But it's real quick. You don't really hear the G. It's a ng. When. And they have the NH sound. Yeah. Matter of fact, one of my favorite little alliterations that I've always remembered from Vietnamese is nyo 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 nyo, which just means like so many little houses. And it's funny because traveled to San Francisco, and as you come in to San Francisco, inland side, you go through an area where there's all these little painted houses on a row, little boxes, if you remember the song. Whenever I see it, it goes, ah, nya 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 nya. Vietnamese is the language I use or remember the least, because I'm not exposed to it. However, about 10 years ago, well, take it back, 20 years ago, I worked for Massport. And the individual who I worked for was North Vietnamese. He was a North Vietnamese journalist who had escaped to the South and eventually worked his way over to the United States. And he was in charge of the systems department at the terminals in Massport. And every once in a while, his kids would come in and visit him. And I found that when they came in, they would start speaking in Vietnamese. So I did go up to him and said, just want to let you know, I did learn North Vietnamese. I can pick up a little bit of what you said, but when you're talking and you see me smile, it means I know what you said. And again, as I said with the Russian, I feel confident that if I got immersed in the language again, I'd be able to learn it. But then again, as I was studying to give this talk, it was, oh, there's so much to learn to get back into it. So now let's talk about what my job was. Pardon me while I flip my slides to where my notes are so I know where I am. So my job, as I'm talking about my military career when I was an enlisted man, as a voice intercept operator. First learned Vietnamese, and stationed at Kadena Air Force Base in Okinawa. I flew in what is known as an RC-135. It's a recon aircraft. It is a Boeing 707, so it is fairly large. This plane was pre-configured, which is, you know, you go in an aircraft now and they get seats and they got them all in place. This plane was pre-configured with all of our equipment, all of our stations. We had a crew of upwards of 25 to 30 that flew on the plane. We had stations that were able to monitor radar, electronic signal intelligence. Those guys that manned that station were able to pick out what types of radar they were, where they were located, and so forth. We had people on the plane who were Morse code operators. They were able to pick up Morse code transmissions and translate them. We had people on the plane who listened to Vietnamese ground traffic. People passing information on supplies or troop movements or cargo movements and so forth and so on. Those people also dealt with communications to some of the AAA sites, anti-aircraft guns. We had groups that listened to the people with the SAM sites, monitoring their activity there. And then we had a group of us that monitored the language communications. Listened to ground, as I said, the ground traffic. My focus at the end of it was air traffic. So what was my day like? So first of all, I was assigned here to Okinawa. From Okinawa, we would fly into either the Gulf of Tonkin or over Laos. We would fly a 17 to 19-hour mission, depending on weather. So you guys complain about flying 6 hours cross-country in comfortable seats. I was in an airplane with a metal floor. My pillow, if I wanted to take a nap, was an oxygen helmet and a bag. So we were on orbit for 12 hours, and we would fly 3.5 hours to and from orbit. My wife loved this part. Here, if there's hurricanes or something coming, we all batten down and get ourselves ready. Because of the missions, if there was a typhoon coming, we were transferred with a plane down here to the Philippines, Clark Air Force Base. Wife and family, they stayed up in Okinawa. Shift work-wise, we were assigned on a 12-day schedule, we worked 3 8-hour days, 3 8-hour swings, 3 8-hour mid shifts, which is midnight to 8 in the morning, and then 3 days off. However, if you flew during those shifts, you flew once a shift, you actually had to only go into the office for a day and a half. Because as a crew member, you have pre-flight crew rest equal to the length of the mission. You have your mission, and then post-flight crew rest equal to the length of the mission afterwards. So towards the end, I was on the fly once a shift type of sequence. I was stationed there out of Okinawa from 1970 to 1972. So toward the end was end of 71, beginning of 72 that I was on that type of shift. If we were flying out of the Philippines, our mission time was 14, 15 hours, a lot closer to Vietnam than Okinawa was. There, though, pre-flight, post-flight crew rest, forget them. They were all combined as one crew rest. We flew every other day. Now, we provided 24-hour coverage over Vietnam. So whenever one plane was going off orbit, another plane was coming on orbit. And depending upon what the battle situation was in the country, we sometimes could have, during daylight hours, one plane flying over the Gulf and one plane flying inland. I did spend some time in country. And in country, I flew on the, quote, RC-130. 130 is an all-purpose, plug-and-play cargo airplane that the Air Force has. A lot of other companies, services have them as a cargo. We were flying there. We would fly 10 to 12-hour missions. Planes were not pre-configured. If we were going to use a particular plane, they rolled in 2 pallets of radio gear. So we had 2 pallets, about 20 feet long, 8 feet wide, 10 feet high, enclosed, that contained all of our radio equipment and stuff. Flew with a much smaller crew. Here, I was assigned to Cam Bay. Again, we flew every other day. Unfortunately, we were part of the overnight coverage. So we took off around 9 o'clock at night for about 8 hours or so of circling. And we finished in the morning. We landed at Da Nang to offload our tapes and any data we had. We flew back to Cam. The interesting part about it was because of the time we took off, I had a very hard time my first couple of days there adjusting to the schedule. And thank heaven for the human ability to adapt. I adapted to a 48-hour day. So I would sleep a little bit, a few hours before a mission, get on the plane, out to the plane 9 o'clock at night. We get back at 8 o'clock in the morning, something like that. I'd go and have breakfast, sit down and take care of any administrative things I needed to do, and then I would go to sleep for 14 hours. Then we'd get up, eat, do some other stuff. By the way, during this time, I was an E3. I was an airman first class. I had no authority over anything. My second trip, quote, in country, was at, where am I? NKP, Thailand. Nakhon Phanom, Thailand. What we were doing there is, Linda mentioned that I re-enlisted and picked Russian. Well, the reason I re-enlisted was Nakhon Phanom was an experimental base to look at, instead of putting crews in the air on RC-135s, they would put the radios in the air on a aircraft like a U-2 or something like that. We would sit in stations on the ground at the Royal Thai Air Base we were assigned to and do all of our tuning and listening and things like that from there. So there we still worked the 12-hour shifts, but we didn't have the flight time, we didn't have the pre-flight crew rest. But the interesting thing about Nakhon Phanom is it is Ho Chi Minh's birthplace. So during the day, we were allowed to go downtown. And you walk off of the base, say goodbye to the guards that are armed standing at the gate, walk into the center of the town, and there in the fountain in the square is a statue to Ho Chi Minh. And as you're walking around, you're hearing North Vietnamese spoken. And you know everything that they're talking about. And you can't say a word that you understand them. Because then they would know something's going on. Reason I got sent there, again going back, is if I didn't re-enlist. All the people that came in with me for their 4-year initial enlistment, at the end of the 3 years, would have been sent there unaccompanied for their last year of their enlistment. They would have had to send their families back home. Now, that is not the only reason why I re-enlisted. I re-enlisted because they offered me, what did I want to do, where did I want to go, and by the way, we'll give you a bonus, and since you're in the war zone, it's all tax-free anyway. So, as I told you, I started out with Russian in high school, and I went into college and did not do well trying to do Russian language, college Russian. And I was determined to defeat the language. So I picked going back to school in Monterey for Russian. Then I wanted to go back. I had started taking courses to finish my college degree at University of Maryland. And College Park, Maryland is where the University of Maryland is. So I wanted to go back to Fort Meade, NSA, as a Russian linguist. So it avoided me the unaccompanied tour to Thailand for a year. So now the question is, what did I really do? You've seen what my work environment was like. Now let's talk about what I really did. Linda, if you want to pass out paper and pencil, I will give you all an opportunity to do the job that I did.
Take a piece of paper and pass it around.
I will give you a heads up beforehand. I am going to give you 16 four-digit number groups. I'm going to read them. That's what you need to write down. Everybody who's ready? Lorraine, I think some people need some pens down front. Okay. Ready? Mot hai ba bon, nam sao bei tam. Chin sao bei tam, mot bon tam. Tam bei hai bei bon tam. Ba, nam mot chin. Ba bon tam bei, sao mot bon. Chin ba hai bon, nam tam mot. Bon hai, bei bon ba tam. Sao ba hai mot, chin.
What was that first number?
Okay. That was Vietnamese. These are coded messages that we listen to. I'll read them now in English, and I would like you to try and write them down. Just to give you an idea of what... This is part of the learning when you were doing the ground traffic. Again, 16 four-digit number groups. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 6, 7, 8, 1, 1, 4, 8, 8, 7, 2, 3, 2, 7, 4, 9, 3, 3, 3, 3, 5, 1, 9, 9, 3, 4, 8, 7, 6, 1, 1, 4, 9, 3, 2, 4, 5, 5, 8, 1, for 142-7438-6321-9999.
What's the Powerball?
So this is the numbers. Anybody got all of them? Okay, so in terms of what we were listening to on these coded messages being passed, don't need to write it down. What we were listening to, what the speed I read them to you is about an average speed, maybe a little bit slower than average. Also, it took me maybe 30 seconds to read to you this 16 groups of 4. When we were on the plane listening to coded messages, we could be doing this for 30, 45 minutes at a time. And the reality is that when I was listening to 5581, I was probably writing 3487. So this is part of the training we got in the plane. So everybody started when we first went to the airbase in this mode, listening to ground transmissions. As you developed your fluency, your efficiency, and so forth and so on, then you got moved into some of the other groups. I got moved up into the air traffic control.
Ron, does each one of these 4 stand for a letter or a word? What do they mean?
To be honest with you, the only one I think I know is, if I remember correctly, the 999 at the end indicated the end of a message. The rest, again, my job was not in diagnosing what it is. My job was just writing it down. While we were on the plane, someone would, we finished up a piece of paper, we'd put our hand up, and someone would come up from where the analysts were, grab the paper, and go back and start working on it. So I have really no idea. Realistically, they were probably coded messages talking about troop movements, cargo movements, so forth and so on.
Why didn't they just tape it and slow it down by 50%?
That's not the job. Okay, so going back, the purpose of flying in the planes was to provide real-time intelligence and warnings. Now, when we got back to Kadena, these tapes were all offloaded, and if you worked in the office, had to go in, these tapes were replayed and transcribed so that they could be sent hard copy with really what was heard. So they did do it, but we were tasked with real-time stuff.
What about CW? Shortwave.
I don't remember all the stations. As I said, again, okay, let me go back to a few other things. First of all, we flew at 35,000 feet in the RC-135s. We had no fighter cover. We were flying in a war zone. Our protection was us. The basic feeling was, if someone's coming after us, we'll know it, and we can get out of there. The purpose was to provide SAM and MiG warnings to Allied aircraft flying over Vietnam. So one of the things is, everybody Allied was supposed to have the guard channel turned on. The guard channel is not a communications channel. It is a channel used to pass warnings. Okay, so again, I'm sitting in my station doing my stuff. If any warnings are coming out, they're coming from the mission supervisor over guard, which I'm not hearing. That was the primary mission of our aircraft. The rest of it was intelligence gathering.
Did the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong know that they were being possibly monitored, do you think?
The answer to that question is, in my heart, If they knew how good a job we were doing, they would have spared no details trying to get us shut down. Yes?
Yes, since the North Vietnamese language is so difficult, why didn't you, or did they ever use native Vietnamese?
Not in these aircraft.
I mean, we had trusted people.
You had North Vietnamese linguists, you had North Vietnamese linguists on the ground and so forth and so on. We were doing other types of data gathering. They did not put them in the aircraft. Okay, so what did the normal mission start like? So we would get on orbit, either, as I said, over the Gulf or over Laos. Flying at 35,000 feet, we got a wide span coverage of North Vietnam. Our aircraft flying the RC-135s focused on communications going on in North Vietnam. We were not listening to the South. Our missions were timed that we probably got in orbit around 4 o'clock local time in the morning. So the first things we would do is pick up their comm checks from the various airfields. Each airfield has probably 4 or 5 different communications channels it uses. And again, many of you have all probably flown, and you stop and think, there's one channel that the ground support people use. Mechanics, refueling, all of this sort of stuff. There's a second channel that's used to taxi aircraft from their parking spot out to the runway and back from the runway. There's a third channel that's used to monitor takeoffs and landings. And once the plane is taken off, there's at least one more channel that's used between the aircraft talking to each other as they're flying. So we had to, first thing in the morning, identify what the sequence of channels each of the various airports were using. Now, we had some history in terms of what ranges, frequency ranges they would be in, but we still had to find them because we didn't know what they were going to use on a particular day. After the plane started taking off, we needed to identify what they were doing. So in Vietnam, in the northern part here, they had 3 or 4 training bases where pilots could practice and so forth and so on. They had target ranges for bombing and strafing and so forth and so on. Their bases that would interact with Allied aircraft were down here in the south. So first we had to identify, if we could, what base they were coming from. That was pretty much because we knew the frequencies. Once we identified the frequencies, we would know if they were flying up here or down here. Then we needed to identify what they were doing. Takeoffs and landings, new pilot training. Were they testing a new type of aircraft? The Vietnamese, when the war started in the 60s, were buying old MiG-15s that the Chinese were remanufacturing from the Russians. Then they would get up into the MiG-17s. And the new aircraft went in place when I was there in the 70s, 71s, were the MiG-21s. So you needed to try and identify what type of aircraft. And you could do that by picking up things such as the speed they were flying, the rate of climb they had. Also, you wanted to listen to what they were practicing. Some of it could be tactics. There were cargo aircraft that flew between would fly between an airport up here and an airport down here, or between the various airports and airfields in the north. If we were listening to ground traffic, we were listening primarily again, along here into Hanoi area and along the coast here, we were listening to could be listening to anti-aircraft units, we could be listening to SAM units, we could be listening to command and control, directing troops and weapons in a certain spot. Now, if we were flying out of Cameron, we were focused on South Vietnam. We were flying at maybe 20,000 feet. We didn't have the range to pick up air traffic and other things up here in the north. Here our focus was over what was going on in South Vietnam. Again, most of our missions here were overnight, part of that 24-hour coverage of aircraft over the country. Here, again, we're listening primarily to ground communications. You're listening to troop movements. You're listening to instructions back and forth to anti-aircraft guns or SAM sites. One of the things we had on a training tape is that we were listening to a spotter. A spotter was an individual who was stationed near the coast, looking at the fighters coming in from the Navy ships and identifying out what type of planes, what type of armament, where they were going. So in this one training tape we had, you hear the spotter coming, and he's talking about these 4 planes coming in, not armed with exterior bombs and not armed with exterior wing tanks. They were coming in to do strafing. All of a sudden you hear him yell, "They're coming after me!" And then you hear him start to run. You can hear the leaves brushing against his uniform. You can hear his feet pounding in the ground. Then you hear bullets behind him. He's screaming, "They're coming after me, they're coming after me." Then you hear some bombs dropping. And that was the end of the tape. But that's the type of traffic we were picking up there. That was what we were listening to down there. Different focus of what we were doing. Oops, wrong button. So now let me tell you some stories. So some of these stories are things that I was involved with. Some of these stories are things that I knew about from training tapes or just briefings. So in the article in the paper, it mentioned the fact that I said that at that time, the North Vietnamese were some of the best pilots in the world. So let me first back up and say one. You all drive cars, mostly. Most of you drive cars. You all know that as an experienced driver, the longer you drive, the better you are driving a car. As an experienced driver, you become attuned to the car you're driving. You know that the little clink that you hear off the back is nothing wrong. It's just the fact that you got a loose wire back there that's banging against the gas cap. North Vietnamese, in the 70s when I was, the best pilots in the world were the Israelis. They flew all the time. They flew in combat, and they flew successfully in combat. North Vietnamese were probably the second best Air Force in terms of pilots because, again, U.S. pilots were very good, but U.S. pilots were stationed in and out of Vietnam on rotating basis. They didn't become as familiar with the planes. They didn't become as familiar with combat tactics. North Vietnamese had some of the best pilots. There was one pilot, and I apologize because I don't really remember his name, but I think it was Tran. Unfortunately, Tran is a common Vietnamese name like John. But Tran was their top pilot. We knew Tran by his voice. So one of the stories that's passed on about Tran is that he had a American fighter lined up to shoot down. Tran would fly MiG-21s. Top pilots, he flew the top equipment. And as he's getting ready to shoot the U.S. plane down, a MiG-15 pops up between him and the American plane. MiG-15 was a new pilot. Oh, he's going to get his first kill. Tran gets on his radio between the aircraft and says, "Get out of there, that's my target." Guy in the MiG-15 doesn't answer him. Gives him again a warning. "Get out of there, that's my target." Doesn't answer. "I'm going to shoot you down, get out of there." Next thing you hear from Tran is, "Bail out." And he shot down the MiG-15. The American plane got away fine. Tran was really a character. So again, a group of Navy F-4s, Flight of 4, is coming back from a bombing run or whatever. They've dropped all their ordnance. They're heading back to their carrier to land. And they're being warned that there's a North Vietnamese fighter in the neighborhood. So they start to head over to the aircraft carrier and they go through a cloud bank. And when they come out of the cloud bank, the controller on the aircraft carrier says, "There's 5 of you." And the lead pilot says, "No, we're only 4. He says, "No, there's 5 of you." He looks around and says, "Yeah, it's a MiG-21. Tran was out of ammunition. He didn't have anything to shoot down. And he flew very nicely in formation with these 4 Navy pilots back to within what he considered safe range. Navy pilots descended to get to land, and he wagged his wings, took off, and went back to his home base. We were talking at lunch today about the politics of the military. So the other Tran story I have, and this one I was involved in, talked about the fact that they used to fly cargo planes between the southern bases and the northern bases. But we identified the fact that Tran and several of the other senior North Vietnamese pilots were on this cargo plane flying back to the north. Our mission supervisor got in touch with command and said, "We can make a major impact in the North Vietnamese Air Force if we shoot this cargo plane down." And no matter how much he cajoled, begged, pleaded, we cannot shoot down an unarmed cargo plane. Okay. Last story I have, again, I was very much involved in this one. We were over here in Nakhon Phanom. And for the North Vietnamese, they had code words. I mentioned this phrase, it means nothing. So many little houses, but no real meaning. Well, they had phrases like that that indicated arm your weapons, disarm your weapons. And the standard procedure was, if you heard the code word for arm your weapons and did not hear anything for 2 minutes, you notified the mission supervisor. And then from there, you follow whatever instructions he gave you. So I'm sitting at my station in NKP, and lo and behold, I hear those little words, 4 words. And then I hear nothing. I hear nothing for 2 minutes. Call my supervisor. Okay, let me know, update me every minute. Every minute for the next 3 minutes. Nothing, nothing, nothing. He says, okay, keep me updated. Another 2 or 3 minutes go by. He comes over to me, taps me on the shoulder, and says, "Are you sure you heard what you heard?" I said, "Yes, it's on the tape. Grab it if you need to." He said, "Nope, I trust you." And he said, a couple of minutes went by, and he comes over to me and says, "Just to let you know, they pulled every Allied aircraft out of the sky over North Vietnam based on what you heard. Okay, I'm an E3, 23 years old. No pressure. About 5 or so minutes later, I heard the code word disarm. My supervisor came over and just checked to make sure I was all right. About 5 or 10 minutes later, again, I heard the word to arm your weapons. Okay, here we go again. Went through the couple of minutes, and okay, keep me posted every minute. Did another 3 minutes. They said to me, okay, we're all right. Go ahead, keep monitoring. After the shift, I went over and talked to him. And what had happened was, while we were listening to the communications, an Army radar unit that was plotting air traffic, U.S. Army plotting traffic here, had their grid flipped. So instead of one corner being here, it was down here. And the track they were flying, one of the missions that they flew was a track out of the airbase, over the Gulf, and back to the airbase to shoot down American planes or attack the boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. But they were flying it actually up here in testing. But because the Army corroboration to my arm your weapons thought they were down here, they pulled all the aircraft out of the sky. You know, we talk about pressure. And I've always told the story that, to me, if I missed those 4 little words, somebody could die. Now, we talked about guard channel, and over lunch somebody asked me, do we ever get feedback? Worst feedback we could ever get was a plane got shot down and the pilot was killed. The frustrating feedback we would get would be that a plane was shot down and the pilot was rescued, and when he was asked during his debriefing is if he heard the alert come out over guard or not, was, oh, no, I turned guard off because there was too much chatter going on. So we're up there flying, trying to save somebody's butt, and they're not listening to it. Now, this is my North Vietnamese. Russian was entirely different. Russian, I worked at NSA. I worked 5 days a week, 7 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. And I went in and I was transcribing tapes. Now, some myths and things about NSA. NSA, I carried a top secret security clearance. That got me into the front door and up to the Marine standing guard armed at the front desk. That's as far as a top secret clearance got me. To go any further, you needed a higher than top secret clearance. And there are many levels of secret clearances above top secret. Matter of fact, I was told that the clearance I held was, if I was in the office with the president, and second part of security is you have to have a need to know. And had the need to know, the president couldn't kick me out of the office. So, leave the guard station with my badge, and I'd walk down the hallway to my office. Especially toward the latter years, there were monitors that would scan the badge automatically. If I was in a wrong corridor, alarms would go off, and the Marines that were standing guard would very nicely escort me to somebody. Once I got to my office, used my badge to get myself into the office. Only geared to about a half a dozen of us. That's all that was allowed in that office. We were listening for tapes, listening to tapes. These tapes were collected from who knows where. Probably a lot of RC-135s and stuff over the Soviet Union. Could be stations very much like NKP. Most of the traffic we listened to was activity on testing aircraft. And again, there we were focusing on picking up the capabilities and so forth and so on. They were probably at that time they were busy testing the MiG-19s, the 23s, and maybe even some of the 25s. But that was the job there. I could have, when my enlistment ended, left my office Friday in my uniform, walked back Monday in civilian clothes, sat down at my same desk, picked up the same tape, and done the rest of it. After listening for 3 years to the 3 civilians that were in my office, I wanted no part of working there as a civilian. As much as they talked about how secure the job was and everything else, it was not fun. Also at that time, the voice intercept operator, the linguist field, was overflowing with people. So I was a staff sergeant at the time, E5, excuse me. And I was basically told that if I re-enlisted, I had no chance of being promoted in 4 years. And I ended up going to work for Ross Perot, which was a great experience. EDS. So, that's the end of my presentation, and I will now open the floor to any questions anybody might have. Yes, Tom.
A couple questions. First of all, with the complexities in the language, I mean, how often were mistakes happen?
Well,
And the speed they were talking and everything.
okay, I'll go back to when I was in the language school. As I said, it was 5 days a week, 6, 7 hours a day, and you were immersed in it. About 3 weeks before in learning the language, we didn't just learn the language. We learned about culture, we learned about family life. Gave you an insight into what the language was saying and how they structured things. We had one of our instructors stand up and lecture to us in a room probably a little bit bigger than this for 2 hours on Vietnamese social life, family life, society. This is all stuff we had learned the previous 8 months, but in bits and pieces. He sat there and lectured. There were 2 words he had to, quote, translate for us, which he translated using Vietnamese. I walked out of that room and I knew everything he had said, all the nuances, and I said, boy, I know this language. So the answer is 9 months. It's what it took me to really understand completely the North Vietnamese language. Now, I was learning it there on a conversational society basis, not military terms. My job was more military.
Okay. The other question is, did you have any exposure to the other regional languages, Cambodian or Laotian or even
No.
Thai?
No,
No.
no, not at all.
All right. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Regarding the NKP in Thailand, do you
Yeah.
know the history of why Ho Chi Minh was born there and why there's a North Vietnamese community there speaking the language?
The answer is no, I don't. We just found it interesting that that's where he was born. And I don't know why there was a large North Vietnamese community there. A lot of it, again, as I talked about the gentleman from Massport, a lot of North Vietnam, I think this is well after Ho Chi Minh's time. But again, don't forget, they were fighting the French before. They were being overrun by the Chinese. They could have just been a safe place for people to evacuate to. But beyond that, I don't know.
More questions?
Yes?
Vietnamese use Morse code.
Yes?
How did they associate their Morse with, even Morse code today, because it's associated with the English alphabet?
The answer is I can't tell you because I was not one of the Morse code operators.
They did have a,
But they did have a Morse code. We did have a couple of stations with Diddy Boppers. Yes?
Did you have in-flight refueling on those long flights?
Yes. The reason we carried an oxygen helmet was
question, Ron.
about
Repeat the question.
Oh, he asked if we did in-flight refueling. Yes, that's the only thing we did. So for about halfway through the mission, for about 45 minutes, we would move off orbit, meet up with the tanker, refuel, and come back. So we were in the air for 18, 19 hours. Yes?
Did you find any influence from French language? Was that used at all?
The interesting part about Vietnamese is, for example, and again, I got to be very honest with you. You asked the question and it pops in my mind. I was not thinking about this beforehand. The Vietnamese word for vehicle is xe, xe. And that's how they would describe all types of vehicles. Xe something for a cart and so forth. A truck is xe camion, which is the French camion for truck. Guess what Jeep was? C'est Jeep. So yes, there was some influence, but not a, but if you heard it, you knew what it was, or you knew what part of. The only other comment I'll make, just as a quick story, is most of my time was spent flying. I did spend time in the country. The closest I physically claim to battle was, first of all, whenever we flew out of Cam Ranh Bay, they would issue each of us a flak vest, a .38, 6 bullets, and 6 tracers. That was it. So, but several times, one time when we were supposed to fly into Da Nang, we were turned around and headed back to Cam Ranh Bay for a landing because Da Nang was under mortar attack. There were many times that we would land in Da Nang right after a mortar attack, and you can see the soldiers scurrying around with that. One time we landed and our pilot did a engines running touch and go. He landed, we flew open the side door of the cargo plane, threw out the tape, shut the door, and he took off because there was still there was a mortar attack going on the perimeter of Da Nang. The other part is when I was at the barracks at Da Nang, at Cam Ranh Bay. We could sit out some nights overlooking Cam Ranh Bay and watch the machine gun emplacements on the beach to the right and left of us, shooting bullets and tracers at fishing boats out in the bay to keep them a certain distance away from the barracks and the land. It's the closest I came to combat.
Anyone else? Ed?
Ed?
Just want to,
Yeah, we are.
anybody that's Vietnam related, war zone, stick around if you like, to help with these youngsters, answer some questions about what you did in Vietnam. Be very helpful. Ron and I plan.
I didn't hear what he said.
He said, please, Vietnam veterans, remember, stick around, pay a short visit to our students, tell them your experiences. They are working on a school project. You'll be a big help to them. Thank you. And thank you very much to Ron for the excellent.
Thank you all. Thank you. And by the way, just the last thing, everybody, service, thank you all for your service, men and women. I thank you.
And we will see you next month.